Welcome to Fox 23's Frigid, where we take a deep dive with a keen eye into cold cases across the state of Oklahoma. Today, I'm joined by Marshall Johnson, as well as investigative reporter Janna Clark. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Today, we are discussing a case right out of Tulsa, the murder of Gertrude Blakey. Gertrude lived in Tulsa near 31st and Utica. At the time of her murder, this was kind of a wealthier area, and it's one of the oldest and wealthiest in Tulsa. And in October of 1981, she was beaten to death brutally just inside her home, and her killer or killers were never found. So first, Marshall, I just kind of want to talk about Gertrude. Who was she?
So Gertrude was a socialite. She was on the board of directors for T.H. Rogers Lumber Company. She enjoyed the Tulsa Philharmonic, hanging out with her friends, doing what normal 73-year-old socialites do in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1980.
And it was really strange for there to be a homicide in that neighborhood because it is a very upscale neighborhood. What do you know the name of the neighborhood, Marshall?
Oh, I want to say it's Bryn Rose or the Rose, something Rose edition, something along those lines. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good question. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Um, and was Gertrude married at the time of her murder, or did she have a partner?
No, she was divorced from Carl Blakey.
Okay. So the day of her murder, Gertrude had plans with a friend that night. She was going to a show or something, and she never showed up. So her friend got nervous and ended up calling Gertrude's cousins to go check on her. When they arrived, they found your grandmother bleeding on the floor just inside the home, and she was still alive at the time, so they took her to the hospital or called an ambulance to take her to the hospital, and then she died from her injuries 8 days later. There was speculation at the time that she may have just fallen and hit her head, but when the medical examiner's report came back, they found that she'd actually been hit in the back of the head by an object at least 5 times, and they deemed her death a homicide. At the time, police didn't find any signs of forced entry into her home, so were any of her items taken, stolen? Were there any other signs of a robbery?
Nothing was stolen from her home at the time of the attack.
Mm-hmm. Was there ever a weapon found?
I did not know that there was a weapon found, but I was informed that there was a weapon found by a news interview with Tulsa police. So there was a weapon found a couple of months after the murder had happened. And some 20 plus, 40 plus years later, Tulsa Police Department decided to do DNA testing on it, allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was a neighbor who found it was a lead pipe, found it in the bushes nearby and turned that in. And the interview was with me. It was Brandon Watkins with TPD did the interview with me. And he was the one that told me that neighbors had found that lead pipe and turned it in back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that would be correct, yes.
Investigators also learned Gertrude was seemingly a bit paranoid at the time of her murder. She had some anxiety happening, and she had recently installed a red porch light, telling her neighbor that if she'd ever turned it on that they need to call the police. Why do you think at the time she had so much paranoia and anxiety?
So there's a stigma with the word paranoia. I don't call it paranoia. I call it she was terrified for her life and had reason to be so.
Okay.
Um, During that time, Gertrude was being blackmailed by our cousins for a rape that had occurred by one of my brothers. She was also going to testify in court against my mother for the abuse that had happened to us kids, as well as another rape that had happened to my sister by the same brother. And so, yeah, she was scared to death. She's getting threatened by my father, who's a ex-Special Forces Tulsa cop. She's terrified. And she's telling everybody that she can about it. And she has no one to turn to in her whole family to help her, even the Tulsa police.
What was the timeline on that between when she was attacked and when she was supposed to go to court? Do you know?
She was attacked on October 13th, and she was supposed to be in court on October 22nd.
Yeah, I didn't know about all the previous incidents with, did you say your mother? And so of course that's gonna cause, fear and anxiety and those kind of things. So I apologize for using the word paranoia. That was not what I was intending. And
There's no apologies are required here. This is a very sensitive, hard conversation for anybody to have in their family.
of course.
And unfortunately, I'm really good at that. I mean, it's just the way of it. I know how to deal with this kind of thing. It's interesting that people think that I don't handle things the right way, and I've not been nice throughout this whole situation. I've been lied to, gaslit, harassed. I mean, it's been a process getting to this point.
At the time, police said money may have played a factor in Gertrude's murder, and she had a will, she had a trust fund set up if she were to die. And in 1997, 16 years after her murder, Gertrude's daughter, Anne, and your mother, was charged with Gertrude's death.
I was told that, and Janna, we actually spoke about this earlier. I was told that the Tulsa Police Department went to a judge and asked the judge that they wanted to charge her with murder. And the judge told them, no, you don't have enough evidence. And the reason I think that that's all very interesting, Brendan Watkins said that in his interview with you, and that's not the judge's decision. That's the DA's decision.
So let me just be clear. Was she charged and then just not found, like the charges didn't stay? Or was she never charged?
Never charged with murder.
But to be clear, the detective did tell me that at the time, Tulsa police thought that his mother, Ann Elder, and potentially also his father, Richard Elder, may have been responsible for her murder, and that they asked about potential charges. They also thought there might have been somebody else involved, that it was potentially they hired someone or talked somebody else into actually committing the murder, but they thought that potentially Richard and Ann were behind the murder itself. But there were never actually charges filed. They just suspected that maybe charges should be filed, is what they told me.
Was she ever arrested? Was she ever taken in for questioning or anything?
From what I've been told is that she had talked to the police and told them that she's not going to talk to them. She lawyered up immediately.
But she had been arrested previously, right? She had a record.
Oh yeah, she's got a long, lengthy record, a criminal record for fraud, false prescriptions, you name it. She's got it on her record.
And you kind of touched on this earlier, but I kind of want to go a little bit more in depth. They were not close, it seems. Gertrude and Anne.
Who were not close?
Gertrude and Anne. Or were they? What was their relationship like?
Tumultuous. I think that Gertrude felt responsible for Anne until her later years, and then when Anne got with Richard, it went south. Richard was a very violent person. Anne had already been in a lot of trouble and was dealing with a lot of mental and emotional issues. She had already had a child from a rape at the age of 12. And, I'm sure that had affected her. I remember her telling me stories about how that had affected her. And it basically destroyed their relationship between Carl Blakey and her mother, so on and so forth. So I don't think they had a good relationship. In the end, I know they didn't have a good relationship. They weren't welcome at her home. And Anne was basically threatening Gertrude at every turn to not deny Anne money from the trust fund or from, attachment to T.H. Rogers Lumber Company.
So obviously her relationship was not the best with Anne, and Anne was never, I guess, officially charged with any kind of connected to Gertrude's murder.
No.
And like you mentioned, detectives kind of believed that Anne and her husband at the time may have planned it but not carried out the murder.
They didn't know.
Yeah. But there was suspicion.
That's what they said. They said they didn't know, but they suspected. Yes.
So were there any other persons of interest in this case besides Anne and her husband?
So there's a story from the very beginning of the investigation where they claim that they saw some black guy running away from the scene. I don't really believe that theory. I believe that Ann Elder did this herself. I just can't prove that. She has threatened me with murder. She has admitted to murder. She this is very clear. Ann did this. I'm just not sure exactly who did this. Um, and then of course we've got Richard and the recording of Ann Elder and Caroline Truitt speaking about the murder.
The Tulsa Criminal Investigation Homicide Division has called me and Marshall, and they have just point blank said that if we do not cooperate with them, we'll go to jail.
Okay.
Yeah, for a couple of days, and we'll see how we like it, and then see if we want to talk to him about grandmother's murder.
Well, I don't have anything to do with it.
Well, Mama, you said you were in San Francisco.
What now?
You said you were in San Francisco when it happened.
Yeah.
And
We were in San Francisco when we got my mother.
when you got your mother,
Yeah, she was sick and she was killed.
Do you believe that your mother, Anne, was responsible for Gertrude's murder?
Yes, I believe she was more responsible for her murder. Yes.
Why do you believe that?
I believe that Anne had no other choice but to murder Gertrude because they were going to lose control of the T.H. Rogers Lumber Company, and our cousins were fighting for control of the company as well.
Mhm.
And it turned into an issue where the cousins were stealing from Gertrude's estate. Anne and Richard are trying to get control of Gertrude, the Mabel Marshall Trust Fund. And in doing so, that turned into an issue where the murder can't be solved because there's too much fraud going on both sides of it.
So they wanted her money that they did not believe they were going to get. Or did they think that do they think that they were left in her will? Did they think that they had access to this trust if she died? Because what would her death have brought to them if they weren't even involved in that? How would they have had access to it?
Okay, so when Gertrude Blakey died, at the time of her death, she had 3 issues going on.
Mm-hmm.
Issue number 1 is the Gertrude Blakey estate. That involves her house, that involves all of her personal issues, such as her clothing, jewelry, pins, pieces of paper, whatever, anything in her home, her estate. That's all that comprised of. Then you had the Gertrude Blakey Trust Fund. Ann Elder didn't even know about the trust fund. I know about it through my investigation. So Ann wasn't ever able to contest that trust fund. It was just outright stolen and given to my cousins. And then you have the Mabel Marshall Trust Fund, which I am the trustee of now. And that's the trust fund that Ann and Richard eventually got a hold of and had control of through T.H. Rogers. And that control, interestingly enough, the shares of stock that controlled T.H. Rogers came with a voting proxy. That voting proxy was signed right over to my cousins. My cousins and Ann Elder are mortal enemies. Mortal enemies. So this was a cover-up on both sides. We've got my cousins who have robbed an estate and stolen an estate and helped cover up a murder. They cleaned the murder scene up. They did. We have record of this. And then we have my mother and my father who murdered my grandmother in order to get the money. They're all guilty.
You had mentioned that you found out that Gertrude's home had been cleaned.
Yeah. Okay. So when I talked to Mike Huff and was telling him what had happened here, he told me then that they didn't show up to her house until a week later when the coroner came out and said that, oh no, this is a homicide. She's been beat to death. So he told me that they show up to the house and they find out that my cousins are all there, loading up all of her personal belongings into a U-Haul truck. The only way that would have happened is if they cleaned the front foyer of that door up, because it was covered in her blood, and her dog had ran through the house and tracked bloody footprints from her dog all through the house. Also, I am the trustee of the Mabel Marshall Trust Fund, and that trust fund paid for my cousins to go get a moving truck, paid for the moving company, the whole nine. I have record of it. It's disgusting. And they also did that before she ever even died. So they all knew that. I believe that that my cousins knew. I believe in the Anna Richard murder, and everybody knew this was going to go down the pipe. Otherwise, these rapes that occurred are going to ruin T.H. Rogers Lumber Company.
Do you have record of these rape incidents occurring? Did they go
sister, yeah,
like legally?
I could prove that these things have occurred. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is Anne and her husband still alive today?
No. Richard died in 2011, and Anne died in 2012.
Mm-hmm. So, if what you believe is true, you know, what police have not been able to actually technically prove is true, and Anne and Richard were the ones responsible for Gertrude's murder, does that mean that this case will remain unsolved because they're no longer here? Or is there a possibility that there is somebody else out there that caused Gertrude's murder?
I don't believe so. I mean, I think that let me rephrase that. I think that there could be a possibility that there was a third party that actually hit her in the head. Mm-hmm. I believe that person to be Ann Elder. I think that the whole story that they got somebody else involved is just that, a story. I also think that there's enough evidence to prove that this has been a RICO conspiracy to cover up murder. There's multiple issues going on. It's not just a murder. There's a RICO cover up going on here. And I also think that there's enough evidence to have already proved that this murder was committed by Richard and Ann Elder, and that the police have withheld information, and rather than solving a murder or dealing with it or investigating it correctly, they have fought me on it and refused to deal with it. That's the issue. And when you have cops that refuse to do their job, then nothing happens with the case because they throw it in a file and they refuse to do their job. And that's what's going on. And that's criminal to me.
Do you think police were distracted when Gertrude was killed?
I think they spent wasted a lot of time messing with the Roger Wheeler deal. And they didn't look into the Gertrude Blakey issue for two reasons. One, Richard Elder's a Tulsa cop. And two, they don't want any more embarrassment. All they cared about is, there's all these rich people that are powerful telling us not to mess with this. There's nothing we can do. We just don't know. We're all so confused of how this could have possibly ever happened. I'm not. It's very clear what happened. They murdered her for her money, and they covered it up, and they're still doing it.
The Roger Wheeler case, that was a big deal at the time, correct?
Yes, Roger Wheeler was murdered on May 27th, and my grandmother was murdered on October 13th. Mm. She actually died on October 21st, but I say that she died on October 13th.
Part of the problem was with the investigation is, when they found her and she was bleeding, and a lot of it was probably because of where it was in town, mm-hmm. a very rich, upscale neighborhood, and nobody expected something like this, that somebody's going to get killed on their front porch of this kind of a neighborhood. So part of the problem is when they found her and they thought maybe she fell, police did not, they told me this, they did not actually start investigating this until 8 days later when she died. And then they found out, the medical examiner checked and they were like, oh, it's blunt force trauma. She was hit multiple times in the head and it's homicide. And they were like, oh, it's homicide. Let's investigate. But like he mentioned, at the time, the Roger Wheeler case was huge. I mean, that case is still talked about today, mm-hmm. and they were in deep with that one, mm-hmm. and that was going on at the same time. So they were, busy.
Yeah. 8 days though is a long time.
I'd like to interject if I could
Absolutely.
about that. So there's news articles where Johnny, I can't remember his last name, but Janna Clark has the news articles, and he talks about this murder, and he says that obviously, clearly, she was murdered. We haven't had the autopsy report yet, but obviously, she was clearly murdered.
So both of your parents were working for Tulsa police at the time of Gertrude's murder.
False. My dad fired in 1975, and I believe my mom was fired in 1978. My mother had my youngest brother, who's now deceased, Aaron Elder, and his father's name is Larry Stokes, and he was a Tulsa police officer as well. And she had a relationship with him and had a child with him, and was released from her duties not too long after, allegedly.
So Larry was still involved in Tulsa police.
Yes, Larry was involved with, I believe so. I believe Larry Stokes was involved with Tulsa police for years after that.
So did Ann and Larry have a close relationship at the time of Gertrude's murder, or were they distanced at that point?
No, they were,
Okay.
yeah, he didn't want to have anything to do with her. He didn't want to have anything to do with my brother, nothing.
So Ann and Richard at the time would have no connection to the police, like to the people, or at least outwardly have no connection with the people directly investigating Gertrude's murder.
I would agree with that. Yeah,
Okay.
I would. I don't think that this cover up was done on Richard and Ann's behalf at all. This was done on T.H. Rogers, some very powerful, and I mean very powerful attorneys. These attorneys have won the most money in the state of Oklahoma. They represent state senators, so on and so forth. They're running the state of Oklahoma. They're in charge of the Bar Association, the whole nine. And this was all going on in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They're not going to go after those people. You're talking about prime time corrupt Oklahoma, Harry Steege years. No, it's corrupt as all get out. They covered this up so they could steal a bunch of money from her. And they put us all put the other kids that were too young to really know about what was going on in DHS care. And I did tell Janna this earlier, but what I experienced in DHS care it was torture all the way through it from the time I was 3 years old until I was 18. That's wrong. And I think that was done on purpose so that as kids wouldn't ever grow up to ask any of these questions about what had going on. And I found out about it by accident, completely by accident. And when I asked my foster parents about it, they immediately ostracized me. And to this day, we do not talk. We do not have a relationship. And I have their last name. I was not adopted by them, but I do have their last name. This whole thing's been heinous. It's terrible.
Anyway,
I'm raining. I'll shut up.
No, you're good. He and his brothers and sisters actually were taken from their mother because of, and put into DHS because of abuse, correct, Marshall?
Yeah, beating and getting raped. Yeah, my sister was getting raped by my older brother, and we were both getting beat up by my mother, my sister, and my brother. Yeah.
Were you all split up whenever you were taken? Or were you put in the same home?
Yeah, my sister went to a really good home, and stayed at that home for the duration. My younger brother and I, not so much. Aaron was really burned really bad. He was in foster care from the time he was 6 months old until he aged out, and had multiple homes, multiple issues due to his injuries, and mentally and emotionally just was not very strong as a child. As an adult, he got better, but and then there's me, and I can't really explain me. There's not a good excuse for me.
I'm curious, because you were removed from that family, you said at age 3, why do you still feel so, why do you want justice for Gertrude?
One, she was murdered. Anyone that was murdered deserves justice. That's just common sense. But the real deal is, and I'm going to try not to cry and get upset when I say this or be really mad in the face when I say this, but I was tortured in DHS care to a horrific degree. locked in a room for days on end with a toilet, a 5-gallon bucket for a toilet, beaten, raped, sodomized. It happened to me. My grandmother promised me that that wouldn't happen, and she got murdered for it. So I feel as an adult and as her grandson, I feel like I should do something about it. And when I found out about this, and I found out that I had been lied about this by the state and by people that were sworn to protect us kids and sworn to do their duty as far as being a police officer and being district attorneys and being attorneys, so on and so forth, and finding out that they all violated their oaths of office to keep this murder quiet and let this happen to us kids, it pissed me off. And I am one of those people, I can hold a grudge until it's old enough to vote. Sorry for the F-bomb, but that's the truth, and you can put that wherever you want. I don't care. I can hold a grudge until it's old enough to vote.
Mhm.
And this is and then on top of that, when I became an adult and I started finding out about this, they started coming after me. They filed erroneous tax returns in my name. They have ruined my marriage. They have used my children to cover up murder and fraud. They attacked my ex-wife, who's an attorney. They have lied about me in court. They have filed false protective orders against me. They have filed false charges against me. Currently, the judge that lives in my grandmother's home fraudulently has a harassment charge, a criminal misdemeanor harassment charge against me, claiming that I had been stalking her since I was 7 years old in DHS care. And she lives in my murdered grandmother's home.
Where, and I'm just curious, do you still live in the area? Or have
No,
you?
it is not safe for me to live in Oklahoma.
So you no longer
My
live in
life
the
has been
state.
threatened multiple times. I live in a little town in Washington State, basically call it Seattle. I'm about 2.5 hours away from the Canadian border. And I know for a fact that it is not safe for me to return until I am guaranteed that I'm going to get immunity from the government and from our governor and from the Oklahoma State Attorney General, Gentner Drummond. And then I will come to Oklahoma and I will testify against all of these people and talk about this and produce the evidence that's required.
And you said that the judge that now lives in your grandmother's home filed a protective order against you.
Yeah.
When was that
She filed a
filed?
protective-
Were you even
Huh?
in the state at the time that it was filed?
No, I wasn't. And what had occurred is that when I found out that my grandmother's home was being lived in by a judge, I actually called the home and I talked to their daughter. And their daughter said that my grandfather built this house and you've got the wrong number, and hung up. So I called back and I said, my grandmother was murdered in the front door of that home. I want to talk to an adult, someone that owns this home, and I want to know how you got it. Not 15 minutes later, I got a call from my attorney who had already sued the trust fund once before and was told that the home that I called was owned by a judge and not to call them again, and that they were going to, basically file charges against me then for harassment, so on and so forth. So instead of solving a murder or looking into a murder, they chose to attack me.
Do you feel like getting justice for Gertrude is in some way also getting justice for you and what you've been through?
I mean, in a way, but I'm not doing this for me. It's for my siblings and my sister. I have a sister that was raped by my brother. Horrifically, too. She can't deal with this. None of my siblings have been able to deal with this the right way. And not only that, but I'm curious to know how many other kids in DHS care have had their lives robbed and stolen from them and put into DHS care. It's a racket. Like, people don't deserve that. And when somebody 75 years old says, hey, guess what? This is what I want done with my estate. It's not intended to be stolen by the state of Oklahoma or attorneys or judges. And I found out about a lot of that too in the course of dealing with all this. Nobody deserves that. It's horrific. They're ruining people's lives, and it's done just to steal from them.
Right.
So it turned into just dealing with a murder, and it grew into a full-blown RICO case and finding out that this is rampant across the board, across the United States. And I feel like people need to know about this stuff. Something has got to be done.
I'm curious, one last question.
Yeah.
You believe that Gertrude's murder was about money?
Yes, I know it was about money. I don't even believe that. I know. I've seen the evidence. I can prove it. She was murdered for her money and it was covered up because if you solve a murder, then you're going to find out that she was defrauded by all of these other people. And those people are very powerful people. So you can't solve a murder unless you're going to oust a lot of powerful people in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm talking about judges, district attorneys, cops. It's bad. It's a list of about 60 people
When it
that are involved with this.
Sorry, when it comes to Ann Elder's motive, do you think her motive was money?
Her motive was keeping Gertrude Blakey quiet about losing her kids, right? And money, both. Ann Elder didn't want anybody knowing that, hey, her son had been raping her own daughter. They don't want that coming out. Ann Elder doesn't want it coming out that, hey, after he was raping his own sister, they shipped him over to our cousin's place in Arkansas and he raped our cousin, then got shipped back. Nobody wants that story coming out, especially Ann and Richard. So plus, because of that story, they're getting cut out of the money. They had no other choice but to kill Gertrude to keep the bleeding from stopping, from happening. Otherwise, the Kennedys are going to wind up with everything. And in the end, the Kennedys wound up with everything anyway. So, frankly, I feel like the killing of Gertrude Blakey was a total waste of time, energy, and money on all of them's part. And if they wanted to just steal her wealth, they should have just done that.
Well, thank you so much, Marshall, and thank you, listeners and viewers today. If you know anything about Gertrude's murder, or if you have any information that could help police solve it, please call Tulsa Crime Stoppers at 918-596-COPS. Thank you both for joining me.
All right. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you.